Most self-improvement revolves around what we can add and what we can do in order to make ourselves and our lives better. But that's only 50% of the equation. The other half of it is what we can remove in order to improve. And today I want to focus on the removal of the versions of ourselves that we learned to perform. So many of us are walking around with masks on that we didn't even realize we put on. This episode is not about fixing yourself. It's about asking yourself the deeper question of who you are when you're not performing a role. In this episode, I'm going to address why we create the masks, how to recognize them since so much of the time it's happening subconsciously. We're not aware that we're wearing a mask, and not how to remove it, but to first identify who the person is underneath the mask so we can start to think about removing it. I'm talking to all of my Wellish besties who find it easier to navigate their life with the mask on because it feels safer. You're maybe a people pleaser. You often find yourself living for other people, or maybe your life looks not how you thought it would or how you want it to. There's a disconnect between who you feel inside your soul that you are and what your life looks like. And you're exhausted because it takes so much work to manage the image instead of just being. You have trouble genuinely feeling seen and understood, and you're stuck inside of this character that you created earlier in life. And it's incredibly hard to show up as somebody new now. And that's why this episode is all about bringing awareness to where in your life you're performing a role and whether or not you are actually just wearing a mask. If anything in this episode resonates with you, I would really appreciate you considering rating and reviewing the show. It really helps get episodes out to more like-minded listeners like you and I who need to live a little bit more wellishly. And if you are imperfect and you just want to feel good enough, you're going to want to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. First and foremost, let me make one thing abundantly clear. Wearing a mask does not mean that you're a fake person. It does not mean you're an untrustworthy fake personality. It means that you're using survival strategies. The number one reason why we create these masks are to protect ourselves. And so really, we can't be mad at ourselves for doing this. We can't be self-critical and look down upon us that we've created the mask to begin with. Because if you can have a little bit of self-compassion and recognize that that version of you just wanted to feel safe. She just wanted to be loved. She learned from experiences in her life that if she does certain behaviors, she won't receive that acceptance. And so she's created this mask in order to feel enough, in order to feel okay inside of her own skin. And when you think of it that way, you genuinely can have so much more compassion for that piece of you that just wants to protect themselves. You don't even realize that you're absorbing this information either, that when you show up a certain way, that way of showing up feel safer. You feel more loved, you feel more accepted compared to you weren't everybody's cup of tea and that didn't feel good. And so you revert back to going towards the behaviors that made you feel safe and loved and accepted. But you're pigeonholing yourself. You're not allowed to be all of the pieces of you. You can only show up in these certain boxed in ways in order to be loved and safe and accepted. And you are missing out on so much more of your life experience by not even knowing what it is that you truly like and getting to know yourself well enough, because you can't engage in those behaviors because then you won't be accepted in society or by the people in your life, or at least so you've convinced yourself in your head. There are so many different kinds of masks. It can manifest in all different ways based on what your life experience was and what your perception of that life experience was. But I think that there's some major common ones. You're probably not alone in what you're experiencing and what you're feeling. It's probably more common than you realize. And I think one of the most common ones is the approval mask. This can show up as being the achiever. You want to get good grades, you want to perform well at work, you want to make sure that you're doing things for other people that make them happy and that you're showing up for them, even at the detriment of you agreeing to things that don't fit into your daily schedule just because you don't want to disappoint them. So this is kind of where people pleasing starts to come into play. I think another big way this shows up in the approval mask is being understanding and being supportive, even if you don't understand and support the behaviors that are happening. It's also being the responsible one, like making sure that you're taking care of everything and making sure everything runs smoothly, making sure that everything is in order because you have everything under control. And when you have everything under control, then you can't be wrong and you've done everything to be right, so you'll gain approval, or being impressive so that you feel worthy. If you have the right job title, if you make enough money, if you go on the vacations and you have the nice clothes and you are the most self-improved wellness girly and you know how things work and you're intelligent and you've gotten your doctorate and I mean, I could go on, but that if you do the impressive things, that's when you have worth, and that will help you gain approval. Another very common mask is being the peacekeeper. You avoid conflict. You don't genuinely say what you think and what you feel because you don't want to spark conflict with other people. Or maybe you show up as a mediator between people in order to calm everything down and make sure everybody gets along. This mask also shows up as being very easygoing, that you're very go with the flow and you don't care. And we can do whatever. It doesn't matter to me. I'll sleep on the floor of the hotel room. I don't need a bed. Don't worry about it. I don't care what we eat for dinner. You can do whatever you want. I don't care what vacation we go on. Oh, I don't care that I just spilled something all over myself and have to walk around the rest of the day with red stain all down the front of my white shirt. Don't worry about it at all. In theory, it sounds like you just aren't going to be a high maintenance person, but really that can start to turn into low standards, which is something that if you resonate with, you can listen to that episode. We talked about that a week or two ago. The peacekeeper mask is also showing up when you never express your needs. Like you feel uncomfortable in a certain situation, or you don't like something, or you wish someone showed up for you in a different way, and you don't share that with that person because you feel afraid of their response. You don't want to upset them. You don't want them to feel like they've done something wrong or like something's wrong with them, because maybe it's somebody that you really care about, but you just don't want to add fuel to what's going on in their life. So you just placate and say, whatever, it's fine. I'm good. It doesn't matter. You can treat me however you want, because I would just rather mm, deal with it on my own and manage my own emotions than talk to you about it and cause maybe a bigger problem. Being the strong one is also a very common mask. You never need to ask for help. You can figure out how to get it done because you've always been able to figure out how to get it done on your own. You've always had to figure out how to do it on your own. So you don't need to ask anybody for help now. And I think that is one that really can slip into the subconscious. You also always have to have it together. Like you can't be messy. You can't screw things up. This is maybe where some of my perfectionists lie. My Welsh brothers and sisters that feel that if they crumble, if they get upset, that is a poor reflection on who they are and how much they've grown and how mentally stable and capable they are. And you can't show any sort of vulnerability, because not only will it feel like weakness and failure within you, but you're afraid that the other people in your life will perceive you as a not happy person, somebody that doesn't have it figured out, somebody that's not likable, because now you're a puddle and that's a burden and nobody wants to deal with that. The number one problem with why we create these masks is that at one point, our brain thought this made sense. It was an intelligent way for us to protect ourselves. And we can still even use the small truths that are in these behaviors to convince ourselves that it's benefiting us. I think the best example of this is that easygoing mentality. That's why I literally made a whole episode about it, like I just told you guys about, is that it keeps that peacekeeper mask on and it keeps you safe, because you learn that if you just go with the flow of what's happening, that people like that. People like when they're not challenged. People like when they can do whatever they want, and you're not going to get in the way of that. You're not going to make it more complicated. And hearing it like that, I personally think, A, well, that's ridiculous that I wouldn't do what I want so that other people can do what they want. And I think B, it's not even that serious. It's not even like if I said, hey, I want to be able to sleep on a couch instead of the floor, that people are gonna be like, oh my God, wow, high maintenance of you. Like it'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense 100%. Also, who do people respect more? The people that respect themselves and say what they want and stand up for themselves, or the people that are just like, go with the flow and let people treat them however they want. So even though logically we can understand why we show up engaging in the behaviors that are technically a mask, but are things about us that are a little bit our personality and that we're not that mad about. The problem is that the strategy keeps running even when you don't need it anymore. Like maybe you can show up in this situation and genuinely say what you need, but you're so programmed to be easygoing that you just don't show up that way. You don't even consider that as an option. You're running on autopilot from the place that the mask has had you running on for so long. So, because our personality is so entwined with the behavior that comes with the mask, it begs the question, how do we know if we're showing up with a mask at all? It's really important to identify what a mask actually is because of how not obvious it can be. I'm going to give you some examples so you can identify it, but really at the end of the day, a mask is an identity that you feel pressured to maintain. You really have to zoom out to see that though, because you might not recognize the pressure that you feel. That it's anytime you feel uncomfortable, anytime you get a little elevated, anytime you feel a little avoidy, anytime you feel worried about the outcome, you're not sure what to say, you're not sure what to do, it's probably because you're engaging in a mask behavior. I'm going to walk you guys through some specific signs to bring clarity to whether or not you're engaging in mask behavior, but also signs that you can be aware of to ask yourself when you're in these situations, that you can ask yourself if you're showing up genuinely from your own identity or if you're showing up from the mask. The first sign is that you feel like you're performing. You feel like you're doing something because you think you should, not because that's genuinely how you would show up if there were no perceptions to be received, if there was no judgment, if nobody had any opinion, if you could just act however the fuck you wanted to act and didn't have any consequences for those actions, that you would show up in what way. My best example of this is when I would show up to social events and felt like I had to be on. I had to be loud, I had to be funny, I had to be talkative, I had to say and do the right things in order to fit in or be liked or be received well. And it wasn't genuinely how I would have liked to have showed up. Like maybe I didn't need to engage in as many conversations as I did, that I'm forcing myself and using tools in my head in order to continue small talk when really I would prefer to just listen and be there and exist. You're monitoring how other people will perceive you instead of just existing. Another very common sign that you're wearing a mask is people only perceive you one way. Like you always have everything together, or you're always so strong, you're so resilient, you always get right back up. You're always so chill, you're always so funny, you're always so insert whatever. But internally, you know that there's so many other sides to you. You feel like if only they knew, like there's so many other pieces of yourself that most people don't get to know about. The third big sign you're wearing a mask is that you feel disconnected from yourself. You're good at functioning in life. You're good at showing up and doing the things that you said you were going to do, and you've got your shit together and things are going well, but you can't help but wonder from time to time what you actually want from life, or what you genuinely enjoy, or what do I genuinely think about this? What do I believe? What is my opinion? You also feel really pressured to maintain an identity. Even if that identity doesn't fully feel like you anymore, it's almost scary to show up as anything else. It's like you show up one way for so long that if you were to show up a different way, it shakes all of the relationships in your life. Like if you're the helper, let's say, like that's your mask, and you can't keep giving to people anymore. I can't keep helping constantly. If you decide you're not going to do that anymore, people will feel slighted by you that benefited from you helping them. Or let's say the example is like you're the successful one and you want to take a different path, and that's going to be perceived by people as you being a failure. That's going to fuck with your self-image. And it's going to make you stay somewhere that you don't want to be so much longer than you need to be there because you can't handle the idea of people not viewing you as the successful one. It makes you start to question your identity. But anytime you feel trapped inside of an identity, that is a surefire indicator that you are wearing a mask. You should feel free inside of your identity, not trapped inside of it. And once we say that, the instinct then, of course, is to rip the mask the fuck off. Like, I need to just start engaging in the behaviors that are more in alignment with me because I don't want to be fake. I don't want to show up wearing this mask. I want to do what I want. I want to live for me. So that's our immediate next response, is that I have to take action in order to create the life that I want because that's what's been shoved down our throats for so long. But I want to slow you down because it's not going to last. It's not going to be sustainable to just rip the mask off that you've literally been wearing for forever. Before you remove the mask, the first step is figuring out who the fuck is under it. This is the part that gets looked over because you feel like you want to show up authentic, but you don't genuinely know what your authentic identity is. So you just start showing up from a place of different shoulds. And if you've worn a mask for a really long time, that line between who you are and who you've adapted into being is really fucking blurred. So that's why that real question becomes, who are you underneath these roles? If you aren't a people pleaser, if you aren't an anxious person, if you aren't the socially awkward one, who are you if you're not a mom? Who are you if you're not the best daughter in the world? Who are you if you're not teacher's pet? Who are you if you're not an athlete? Who are you if you are not these roles, but you are the person that's underneath that? If you are a person who's ride or die loyal, if you are a person who's always honest, if you are a person who's very kind and willing to do anything to help the people that she cares about, that is who you are. And more likely than not, who you are is going to be pretty similar to the mask that you were upkeeping. For the sake of same example, if you are keeping up with a peacekeeping mask, and so you're showing up as the easygoing one, and you're not having standards because you're just letting everything go by the wayside because it's better to be easygoing and low maintenance, it's possible that you are probably a low maintenance person. A high maintenance person isn't going to do that. A high maintenance person isn't going to be able to be easygoing that way, no matter how much they want to protect themselves. They would take on a different mask. But you have to identify what you are easygoing about and what you need to have more standards around. And you need to understand when to be easygoing and when to not. Because, for example, if you're easygoing about what we eat for dinner and you're easygoing about that every single night of your life, you're not even going to know what you like anymore. You're not even going to know what you would want to eat for dinner, and you lose yourself that way. And that's how you start to explore who that person is underneath the mask, by asking yourself, what do you like to do when no one's around, when you are just by yourself? I remember right after my last relationship ended, it was a Saturday and it was summer, and I was sitting in my townhome with all of the windows open, and I think I just had something on Bravo turned on, and I was making myself something in the kitchen, and it dawned on me that in my old life, I would have been out doing something. I would have been out to eat. I would have been out drinking. I would have been going out and doing something in order to keep myself busy with my significant other at that time. And in that moment, I remember feeling at home. I remember feeling that I was engaging in a behavior that was true to myself, because you guys know I'm a girly that can do things solo. If I wanted to go out and drink, if I wanted to go out to eat, if I wanted to experience something, I would go out and do that. And sometimes I do. But I genuinely felt like just because it was Saturday, just because I had a free day with no plans, didn't mean I had to go fill it with those things. That I genuinely enjoyed being able to just be at home. And it was the first time in years that I felt like I was able to actually just exist, that I was able to just do what I wanted that day without anybody else's influence to sway me in another direction. Because if we're being honest, if it's suggested to me, let's go out to eat, let's go do that, I want to go do that. I would love to go out to eat. That's one of my favorite things to do. So, like, I wasn't mad about going out and doing that thing, but I was mad over time that I never got to just be at home. And I was made to feel like we always had to be doing something in order to be living a stimulating life. When really, another one of my favorite things is being able to just exist at home and not feel like I'm missing out on life for doing that. Another question to ask yourself is, what opinions do you have when you're not worried about what other people's perception of those opinions would be? When you're not trying to be liked by the other people in your life? What parts of yourself did you hide because they weren't rewarded by love and safety and acceptance or admiration or like people being proud of you or telling you good job? Like, what parts do you like, going back to like the staying at home example, like that's not something that people are like, people talk bad against that, like that you're wasting your life if you just want to sit at home and not go out and do things. But if you are genuinely a person that would prefer to do that than to go out and do things by themselves, or that just doesn't feel like going out and doing something that day, and that means that you're wasting your life away, like, you start to hide that part of yourself because it's not rewarded. In my opinion, when people lose themselves and they start to ask the question of who they are and what their purpose is, their intention is typically to invent a purpose. Their intention is to add things onto their personality to start to obtain a certain identity, and they can start to discover who they are. When in reality, discovering what your identity is comes down to recognizing and becoming aware of how you show up in the world. It's not a adding new things and becoming this identity. It's a rediscovering of the person that you already are right now. And that can be scary because you might have to be honest with yourself about things that you don't really like. But when you can acknowledge that those pieces of you that you don't really like are also pieces of who you are, and you can do with that information what you will. If you want to try to heal that and get rid of it or mitigate it, that's an option, but it's not an option until you become aware of it. And the truth is you're just going to accept and acknowledge that that is a part of who you are, that what's happened in your life up until this point and how you've perceived what's happened up until your life at this point is what resulted in that being a piece of who you are. Removing the mask isn't about becoming someone new. It's about understanding and learning who you are before you had to engage in those learned behaviors in order to be accepted. And that's something that takes time. It's not something that you're going to listen to this episode and be like, all right, done. I'm going to get on that process. I'm going to be aware of who I am. I'm going to understand all of the things. And then I'm going to remove the mask. And then we're going to be bada bing, bada boom, out of here. It doesn't work like that. Like, it's going to take you living life and experiencing things and noticing how you show up in those things and building the habit and the skill of noticing how you're showing up in the world, and then starting to incorporate how you would like to show up and just being aware of that before you ever even start engaging in those behaviors. It's something that takes time. It's something that you need to not put pressure on yourself in order to discover. And that's a lot of what identity work revolves around, is that pressure that you should be going to the gym and you should be doing self-care and you should be working on something to monetize and you should be making sure that you have a job that's going to get you somewhere in life and you should be having all the friends, and like, it's just relax. Like, it should not be that much pressure. It's not. You're not going to get anywhere when you're pressuring yourself like that. It has to be a very calm and curious noticing of who you are. The last thing I want is for you to leave this episode feeling bad now that you realize that maybe you've been showing up wearing a mask and you do feel that pressure to start to try to do something about it. I want you to pause and be grateful for the mask, because the mask helped you survive so many seasons of your life. And there is nothing shameful about the fact that you've been using one and wearing one to protect yourself. But if you're building a life based on a mask, it's going to eventually feel exhausting and empty. So don't leave this episode with the need to protect yourself more and create a better mask. Leave this episode with a goal to finally meet the person that's underneath that mask. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for being here. I love you guys endlessly, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.